Who says the Wild West doesn't live in South Carolina? And we've got the video, partner, to prove it. Speaking of Wild West, Sheriff Joe institutes an always armed policy for his cowpokes. Then does always armed include the Long Branch Saloon and the Turkish Bath? Dallas PD trying to drop the hammer on toy guns. And about the only ones opposing it are the liberals and funeral home operators. Whoa, some California cops are seen snoozing on company time. Could these human fly traps have been on the edge of the big sleep? And one drunk in the station house uses a plasterboard wall to try to make the front line of the Bears. From Paraguay to paranormal to paranoid, let's hocus pocus your dominocus with Crime Time. Crime Time, an edutainment service from In the Line of Duty, where every week a group of eclectic law enforcement pros leap over tall buildings in a single bound, stop speeding bullets with their teeth, and thwart runaway locomotives with their arms of steel. But you should have heard them whine when we tattooed the S's on their chests. Except, of course, for Officer Sanela Konjevich, who didn't whimper one bit and has courageously consented to join us in place of the lovely Dr. Angela Wingo. Sanela, I will be here to protect you down to my last drop of blood from the salivating, salacious likes of retired Sergeant Rich Simpfer, who, in addition to being the technical advisor for In the Line of Duty, has traveled worldwide for DOJ, helping train officers in foreign lands. Captain Kevin Murphy, a great cop who continues to be a solid anchor and bulwark of our little Crime Time crew. He really gets goosebumps when you call him bulwark, too. Retired Detective Sergeant Mike Guzzi, who not only has been a highly respected cop in the St. Louis area for decades, but also writes a mean column when he puts pen in hand. But he gets testy when you ask him to write anything with pen and gun in hand at the same time. And Deputy Chief Gregory Hawkins of the St. Louis Metro PD, who, like the wise old owl he is, keeps an eye out for truth, justice, and the American way. And Sanela, when he goes like this with his glasses and just stares you dead on, you'll know to start inching for the exits. A young South Carolina officer finds himself giving pursuit to a bank robber who has absolutely no interest in being pursued. The result, as you're about to see, is reality video times 10.
This is one of 5 crime scenes roped off in Rock Hill tonight. Police say just after 2 this afternoon, a man came in and robbed this Bank of America on Dave Lyle Boulevard. Police say the bank robber fired at least 10 shots at police as he left the scene, then led them on a wild chase.
525 Central, go ahead and notify State Highway Patrol and County as well. 3 now, I can ride on 3 now. Coming up on Old 3 Road. He stopped to shoot at me. I got a couple rounds left. Just headed up Springdale Road. I don't know if I hit him or not. They are close. Alright, he's driving off the road a little bit. I don't know if I hit him. Going to the BP station. On Springdale. Alright, last call to the head right. He's got a long line of the crop when he just started firing off a couple more rounds at me with the rifle. He's headed back up Old Springdale Road. It looks like some kind of old, like an HK weapon. We're past Old Springdale headed towards England.
415, I'm behind you. Central West Springdale, dispatch this way.
Alright, he's in his front blazer. He's going to be real careful with him. He's got a long rifle on his car.
Central on calling, dispatch time branch on Springdale. Shots fired again. Central, he just fired shots were Briarfield and Springdale.
Shots fired again. Central, he just fired shots were Briarfield and Springdale.
Copy, suspect down, shots fired. Can you give me an exact location?
Gregory Hawkins, this young officer, to me, showed some amazing stuff during this pursuit, most of which he was in the lead and under fire from an automatic rifle.
I agree, and for a great period of time, he seemed to be totally alone by himself before he was joined by his compadres. He showed great restraint when the vehicle would stop and get out and fire at him. It would have been very easy for an officer to return fire, but not to get back in his car and pursue anymore. He did, and he was diligent, and it ended up with the subsequent shooting of the suspect.
Kevin Murphy, you saw the video. What did you think about this young officer's tenacity in the midst of basically firefight?
Well, you get into a situation like that and you never know until your mettle is tested, and in this case, being a young officer, he handled himself very well. And as I said, you just never know until you're there.
Mike, what is your take? Would most officers have been as tenacious and gutsy as this?
I don't know, especially because the guy's alone. I think he showed some real courage in holding the pursuit and ultimately making the arrest. It's like Greg said, it's pretty easy to say, well, he got away from me, but he was last seen heading west on 40, and I hope somebody else picks him up. This guy stuck with it, and as I said, a good deal of time he's by himself.
Sanela Konjevich, you've seen this as well.
Yes.
What did you think about this young cop's take?
The same thing. I mean, for at least 3 minutes he was by himself. After about 3 minutes, the suspect stops, gets out of the truck and starts shooting at him again. Obviously, he was trying to kill the police officer. He was still alone, and he still continued to pursue him after that. To me, I mean, he did an amazing job. I mean, for anybody, your adrenaline is high up. You want to pursue the suspect, but when he stops a couple of times to shoot at you, obviously to stop pursuing him, I mean, and you still continue to pursue him, give out directions which way you're going, to wait for the assist, I think he did an amazing job.
Rich, what is your take?
I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in this, and they're all pretty positive. We have a supervisor that gets on the air and gives commands and takes over some things. We have an officer who comes up and says, I'm taking over the pursuit so you can concentrate on watching that person in front of you. And this is, I think, an example of what officers should be doing when they are driving and nothing is going on, to play in their mind those scenarios of, when this happens, I'm going to do this. Once he realizes he's being attacked by an assault weapon, he backs off. He tells everybody there's a rifle involved. And when that car slows down, he, instead of going forwards, puts distance in there. Actually uses the vehicle, puts the engine block in front, and returns fire. So those things just didn't happen. He planned for him, he trained for him, and that's one of the keys. He's to be commended.
Have any of you ever been under fire? Have any of you been under fire? Sure. Mike Guzzi, would you tell us about it?
Well, we were down the housing projects walking a footbeat years ago, and we were sniped at. Took cover behind a trash can or a trash container.
How close did it come?
It ricocheted off the sidewalk, say from me to you away.
What's going through your mind?
Let's get out of here.
Greg?
Several occasions. As you've heard me say before, in my file, I've been involved, discharged my weapon 23 different times. And I didn't shoot anybody every time, but 23 different times. Spending 7 years in narcotics, I was shot at several times. One most harrowing moment was kicking in the door, and the suspect inside firing 6 shots while we were kicking in the door, and my partner was actually shot, Lawrence Hamilton. And what goes through your mind, and again, by the grace of God, I think what you try to do is not panic. You never know what you're going to do, and if it could happen 2 days in a row and you're not sure what you're going to do. But I think mainly if you don't panic, training seems to kick in, and survival mode kicks in, and you tend to do the things that you need to do at that time. But there's also fear, and if you can keep that fear down to a minimum while it's happening, while you're going through this, you usually come out okay.
How in the heaven's name, gentleman and lady, do you keep fear down to a minimum? I'll tell you what, I was frightened just listening to that automatic rifle fire. Mike? Greg?
Oh, one thing is this, you know, it's funny how we have to psych ourselves to believe that we are as good as can be. I mean, when you go into those situations, you don't go in and say, I'm going to get killed. I'm going to get shot. You don't feel like that. You feel like you're going to control the situation. If somebody gets shot, you're going to be the shooter. If somebody gets killed, it's going to be the other person. It's not going to be you. Are you afraid? Sure you are. But do you get to that fear where you just panic or want to sit down and cry? I think not. And usually when you do, you end up getting killed.
Mike?
Yeah, I think that's part of it's training, obviously, but part of it's just instinctual. You tend to act, do what has to be done, as Greg said, and then later on you might look back on it and go, holy cow, you know, I should have went to med school. But at that moment, it's time for action. You know, it's not time for a bunch of reflection.
Murph?
Rich can speak to this, but I think what they're talking about is the winning mindset. It's just a matter of the training methodology is that you're going to win no matter what. It's the combat breathing. It's trying to control your emotional state. And I do think that, as Rich said before, it's not if it happens. You have to have the mindset that when it happens, I'm going to do this. So in those moments where you're out there on routine patrol, you're in a lull, you're thinking about that car stop that goes to hell in a handbasket. And you work that through your mind so that you know what you're going to do when it happens. And it's not if, but when it
Rich,
happens.
do these what-if scenarios really work?
Yes, they work, and it's from the day you step foot into that academy, coming in with a professional mindset, having those instructors, academy staff squared away, the best of the best, and from day one, telling those new recruits that this is going to be a different life. You are now going to be the sheepdog taking care of the sheep. And it doesn't just happen. We're going to train you. We're going to put you in that FATS machine, those simulators. We're going to give you an idea of what that's like. And the whole idea of every day is after this shift is over, I'm going to go home. And you just don't go home. You go home because that mindset says, I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to know and attack and do what's necessary to go home. So it's constantly preparing, it's bettering yourself at the range, making sure your equipment is right. That all takes planning and preparation and training. So it just doesn't happen. This officer was prepared, had his vest on, he knew what he was going to do, his weapon was ready, he was calm, he practiced breathing. That stuff just doesn't happen. It comes from the academy, continuing education, and to constantly prepare yourself for the worst moments.
Sanella, you are the youngest one here, except for perhaps me. Are you buying into any of what these veteran officers are saying?
Absolutely, especially what Mr. Sinfer said. I mean, the first day at the academy, they will show you the videos and they will show when a police officer gets killed because he waited too long. You know, it might not be because of his training, but he waited too long and he got killed, he got shot. And the one thing that they always tell us at the academy, at the end of your duty, at the end of the day, you go home safe, you go home, you're not harmed. And even if you're harmed, you're not dead. You're going home to your loved ones, you're going home to your family, your partners go home, you make sure everybody's safe. You have to make sure that's your job, that's your duty.
What's the most frightening incident you've been involved in?
When we got shot at, we were responding to an 8 call. An officer asked for backup because he had a large crowd at the scene where somebody just got shot at a few days before, gang related. We got there, it was a one-way street. I had a ride-along, we had numerous ride-alongs from the academy, newly recruits, first ride-alongs that they ever had. We got there were a lot of people in the streets, a couple of people on the ground with handcuffs on. We got out of the cars, they opened fire at us from the gangways. We didn't know where it was coming from. The glass and the vehicles around us got shattered. Everybody immediately went back to the cars, got the rifles out. I mean, that wasn't somebody telling us, hey, go back to the car, get the rifle. We knew somebody was shooting at us. So the first thing you're going to do, unless you can get to the rifle, you're going to use your personal duty weapon. But in order to get the offensive weapon, it's going to be the rifle. So everybody got back, got their rifles out. I gave the keys to my ride-along and said, if anything happens, drive away. You don't have the gun. You don't have anything else. And those are some of the things you got the training. Otherwise, maybe I would have told her, hey, come with me. But she doesn't have the weapon. She doesn't have anything else. So you don't want to put somebody else in danger. Second thing, you don't want to stand there and you're going to get somebody else injured. You don't want to think about 2 things at a time. You have to go there. You have to take care of business. But you have to make sure everybody else is safe too.
Anything else? Anything else, Ted? What grade do you give this young South Carolina officer, Mike?
Well, I'd say he earned an A.
Everybody agree with that?
Absolutely.
You are watching CrimeTime, an edutainment service available now through Apple's iTunes, the World Wide Web, our website at lineofduty.com, and now directly to your cell phone. As once again, like the Davy Crockett's we are, with the coonskin caps, we are pioneering new turf. Check it out on our website. Florida's Palatka Daily News quotes Putnam County Sheriff Dean Kelly saying 86% fewer injuries to his officers since going Taser department-wide. The sheriff also says, quoting, there have been far fewer injuries to those being arrested because we're not having to fight with these scumbags. Now, Taser is trying to make lives even better for you street cops. Here's Line of Duty Technical Advisor Richard Simpfer.
Stop resisting. There you go. He's got a knife. Drop the knife, sir. Drop the knife or else you will be tased. Taser!
Rich, why is the Taser Cam, if indeed it is, a breakthrough?
Well, I think all the officers who carry a taser know the value of it. It's another tool on the belt that has saved a lot of officers from injuries. It has saved the suspects from getting their heads split open or maced or whatever. So the taser itself is a valuable tool. They have now come up with the new X26, which is a video cam. Fits right on, it's going to fit on all the tasers. Here's the one it fits on here. And this will now record what is going on. Officers that have video camera in their cars swear by it. At first they said, I don't want that camera in my car. It's going to tell everybody what I'm doing. But if you're doing a professional job, they have found that the car video has saved their butts a lot more than it's been detrimental. I believe the same thing's going to happen with the Taser. Are you going to get a glimpse of what's happening? Yes. Are you going to get everything before and after? Depends on when you deploy the Taser. As soon as you throw that switch and get it out here, this camera is now picking up everything that's going on visually and audibly. This is going to tell the story of for the officer when somebody says, I was tased for no reason at all. It's going to show that naked suspect coming at you with a baseball bat. It's going to show the officer giving verbal commands. It's going to be there for you. This is going to be a valuable tool for the officer on the street. Now, at the same time, when I say that, it doesn't mean that you can't articulate and document why you had to use this. That's standard practice. It's got to be done by every officer. But this now is going to be a history to show your administrators, media, the courts, why you had to deploy the Taser.
And the grade you give it as far as being beneficial to cops?
I think it's going to stand right up there with the in-car camera. It's going to rate just one more tool as part of the Taser, which officers believe in. Everyone that doesn't have one says, I want one of those. Those that have it say it's really putting that light on people, getting it out, is gaining compliance. You can even add to the vocabulary now. Not only are you going to be tased, you're on camera. Will slow down and stop a lot of the assaults that are being caused on the street. So I think it's going to be a great tool, and those that can afford it got to add it to the arsenal, because even the price of this is going to save lawsuits down the line.
According to New York's Press and Sun Bulletin, a Village of Deposit, New York cop recently used a taser to disarm a 39-year-old man of a tomahawk. After pulling the subject over, this nut jumped out of the car and charged the officer with a tomahawk, refusing to put it down. The officer deployed his taser and stopped the threat. Mike Guzzi, wise move? Yes, no?
Personally, I would have been inclined to send Coach East to the happy hunting grounds myself if he came at me with a tomahawk. He's lucky he got a rather, shall we say, tolerant officer. I think a taser is very appropriate for controlling unruly suspects and avoiding the use of a nightstick or something. But if somebody's trying to take your head off with an axe, I think it's time to give serious thought to your sidearm.
Simfer?
Well, there's little doubt. I back up what Mike says. The Taser is absolutely one of the best tools out there. However, if somebody gets out of their car with an edged weapon, a tomahawk, and is approaching you, why you would draw that Taser is beyond me. I think there's a training issue there, there's a mindset there, there's a liability issue there that might be creeping in. We see more and more officers in our blotter and stories where they are using a Taser with people who are armed with baseball bats, machetes, and even handguns and rifles instead of lethal force. And this case, it turned out all right. The subject is certainly lucky he's still alive, but so is that officer, and I think there has to be some close looking at when lethal force is appropriate, and certainly, based on this description, lethal force would have been the option. Imagine one stroke. I can close the room 21 feet before you can draw the gun and fire a round. Can sever your arm, an artery, your neck, or anything else. I congratulate the officer, but at the same time, I think we need to be very careful about when Taser is being used.
Captain Murphy, if one of your young coppers had used the Taser in an incident like that, what would you tell her or him?
Well, first of all, you have to say it worked out, but just because it worked out doesn't mean that was the most appropriate use of the Taser at that point. Rich makes a very good point that the reactionary gap of 21 feet for any edged weapon, they can get to you on top of you and do whatever they want to do before you can pull that gun. The thing is, a Taser is very effective with something like that if you have multiple officers, so that you have cover officers who can use lethal force. But if you're by yourself, you know, I agree with these guys here. He goes to the happy hunting ground.
And you have to hit him with the barbs. I mean, it's a one-shot deal, then I've got to go to my sidearm. So again, congratulations, but this is a learning exercise.
It's a great tool, but we've had instances where there have been 3 different officers fire tasers before they actually got the hit that they needed to take the guy down. I mean, in the heat of the moment, it can happen. It's a very effective tool, and when you're hit, you go down like a ton of bricks. But when the stress is there, and if you're by yourself, I say that lethal force is what you want to do, because even if you don't hit that person, they hear the report of the weapon, it may change their attitude.
Greg Hawkins?
In my career, there's been 17 police officers in St. Louis shot and killed in the line of duty. I know that I never wanted to be one of them. If an individual is coming towards me with an axe, he's about to be shot. And the only thing that's going to stop that is if I miss him. The only thing I can see with this officer, I would almost have to think if he's drawing his taser instead of his gun, that he had him on the same side and he missed the gun and pulled the taser. I would certainly think that afterwards you have a long talk with him, because his life was in jeopardy. Had anything gone wrong with the taser, had he missed with the taser, he's probably going to have something severed or probably killed. At that point, you just have to let him know that this is an appropriate situation for a lethal weapon.
Just to reiterate another thing that Rich said, the training issue, are the administrators in that agency, in that region, talking in terms of using the non-lethal as opposed to lethal force?
Sanella, does this make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense. And it's not just missing somebody. If the probes break, the current is not going through. So if you actually hit somebody and they pull it out, now they're even more pissed off. Do you have enough time to get your gun out? Do you have enough time to defend yourself? You have no assist there. Nobody else is covering you. You're a one-man car. I completely agree. I mean, you just don't pull out a taser that's not a deadly weapon against a knife or anything else like that.
This is Crime Time, an edutainment service from In the Line of Duty. Let's hope Maricopa County, Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio has met Bob and Weave. He's going to have to get to know them quickly to keep from meeting Black and Blue over his mandatory new always carry policy for his troops. Always carry policy, and you must act even off duty. Mike, what do you think about Sheriff Arpaio?
Well, that's exactly the way it was when I came on the St. Louis City Police Department. The manual said you had to be armed 24/7, and you were always a police officer, so you had to take action if you saw criminal activity afoot. They ultimately changed that for reasons of civil liability, because what the sheriff has done is he's bought his way into every use of these weapons that come about. Now, in the St. Louis City Police Department now, as with the Sheriff's Department, the officer has an option of carrying the weapon off duty, but is not required to do so.
Rich?
I like Sheriff Joe, and I like his mindset. However, I think the officers are being put into a real precarious situation after 10 or 15 years of the pendulum swinging the other way. What do we do now? Does that mean I can't have a drink off duty? Is 2 drinks too much because now I might be inebriated or impaired and see something going on? It's hot and sweaty out there where he is, so where do I put this weapon if I'm going to the swimming pool? I mean, all of those issues that I've pretty well thought about for 10 years and said now I don't need it today, although I'd like to have it, is putting there. At the same time, the fine print on his rules, and I haven't been able to read it, might be action is simply being a witness. I don't know. He says his officers are well trained. I give him that. But there's going to be some situations now that I think he's going to have to answer down the road. It puts the officers in a tough position.
Greg Hawkins, if you're out with your children and you see an armed robbery, would you have to act under this new policy or lose your job?
I think under this new policy, you certainly be subject to disciplinary action. I think we talked about it in a previous show, Rich and myself, and what Mike just said is a fact that at one point we were inclined to have to carry your weapon 24 hours a day or anytime you were out, and you had to act. That action meant physical action. They didn't tell you at the time just to call the police or give a description was action, like it has been for about the last 15 years. I think he's placed himself in a position where he's going to be hit probably within the next 6 or 7 years with untold amount of lawsuits, both by citizens and by officers who have to carry this gun 24 hours. And getting back to your question, if I'm with my kids I'm not going to put them or my wife or my family in jeopardy. If I have to drive away and drop them off and come back, that's a choice I'll make, but I'm not going to put them in jeopardy because of anything a rule says.
Captain Murphy?
Key is the second component, what constitutes action. I don't have a problem with the carry off duty. I think it's a smart idea, but what's the translation of what constitutes action? Because like these other gentlemen and lady, I'm not going to act if I've got my family with me, put them in jeopardy. Or you've got to know what your backdrop is. What are you dealing with? Could you hit an innocent bystander in trying to do something? And again, we've said it before, being a good witness might be the best action to take.
Sonella, quickly, would you feel comfortable with an always carry mandatory policy?
Always carry, I have no problem with that. Absolutely have no problem. You are a police officer 24/7, but always act, I do have a problem with that because, like, if you have your family with you, you have little kids, I mean, you're putting them in jeopardy. Plus, if you're dealing with a bank robbery or anything else, that's a two-man assignment. I mean, your safety is in question. Plus, you have your kids with you. I mean, is that really doing your job, putting other citizens in danger? I mean, plus, you would need to wait for backup on any of those calls. You would have to call and say, I'm an off-duty officer, I'm following this person. Even if you're in a car. I mean, if you're undercover, you let the dispatcher know, I'm behind this vehicle, they're wanted for armed robbery, carjacking, whatever else. Send me an assist, send me a marked car so they know I'm a police officer.
We have email quickly here in the waning moments of Crime Time 14 about the lead story in Crime Time 13, the two Puerto Rican officers who were shot and killed going into the call at the bakery. Email, I just watched Crime Time 13. While watching the first segment on the bakery robbery, I was shocked. Everyone on your panel talked about going into the store. I thought our procedure was used everywhere. We don't go inside on a hold-up alarm. We try to park where we can't be seen, but can see inside. When everyone arrives, we have dispatch call inside and tell the employee to come outside to us. That way the employee can tell us if there is a robbery, who's inside, etc. And it will hopefully remove at least one potential hostage from the robbery. Of course, they may not be able to come out to us because of the robbers. In that case, we know for sure there is a robbery in progress with hostages. I just couldn't believe no one on your panel mentioned this.
We have the same policy, but I think in reflecting on that, we were talking about the actions that occurred with respect to those two individual officers who were already inside, not the fact that you would make your response and not enter.
Mike?
We always entered the premises. Now, we tried to surveil the inside before you just walked right into it. But no, we always responded to the interior of the business.
Absolutely. I mean, you tell officers you don't pull up in the front door and jump out of the car, but you approach it from a side window or however you can to see in before you just venture in and to try to see the actions or activities. What he's saying, and I'm not sure where that's from or what city that's from.
San Francisco.
Okay. That's I can see some problems with that also. I mean, I could sit here and be critical of that. I don't want to do that, but I'm saying we've always in St. Louis gone into the premises after we've looked to see what was going on.
Sergeant?
He's got a good point, and he's got an excellent policy in the ideal situation, and it would be nice that if we could do that in everyone. But I concur with the captain. We were addressing what was going on once they had entered the store. Certainly, you want to see what's going on in there, and I think there are a variety of ways to approach a call that may be suspicious of a holdup or hostage or whatever, to peek in, car back, those types of things. But at some point you're going to have to go in, and I do concur that that's one way of handling it, and there's a few others.
Kevin?
I just want to add that in our policy, what we do is we send in detectives, plainclothes personnel, if in fact we don't get the response that we want, but we actually contain the perimeter. And we start out with a phone call before we actually send anybody in. We have a lot of banks, and that's tailored to our banks primarily, but any alarm for a robbery.
You'll send in a plainclothes cop?
Yes, we will. That is, if we don't get the response that we want, they know that they're going into a potential situation that could be problematic. But again, 99% of the time, these are situations that turn out to be innocuous. And as Rich said, at some point, you may have to make a decision to go in. That's what we've chosen to do, to send somebody who's in plain clothes in, somebody who has some training, a weapon, if he would have to.
I've never heard of a policy like that, Mike.
The problem I see with it is if there's a robbery going down and they allow this guy to answer the phone, they're going to tell him that this is a false alarm. So the copper's going to be out in the parking lot, and the store clerk's going to have a gun to his head. He's going to say, "No, I accidentally tripped the alarm getting a big gulp for this customer." And so the cop's either going to walk in thinking he's safe and get his head blown off, or the robbery's going to go down.
No, you have to have the person come out and meet you on the parking lot. The person has to come out. We would send somebody in if nobody comes out to us. But what we're doing essentially is the same thing you've done, only what we've done is taken a few steps to try and at least determine what we're dealing with. And I think that's what he's saying in the San Francisco situation.
But you are putting this plainclothes cop in the potential heavy-duty line of fire.
Well, but think about what you're saying. What everybody's saying here is they make their approach and they will go in without trying to verify those initial bits of information. Now, if you send somebody in plain clothes, if you're talking about a banking institution, is the robber that's in there, is he going to automatically know that somebody walking in is a police officer? He may well smell that. But you know what? As they said, you've got to go in at some point. Again, we're talking about a situation you haven't verified a robbery. Mm-hmm. So that's at the point we would send a plainclothesman in.
This officer brings up an excellent textbook example, as I said before, but it could be a really 4-hour to an 8-hour presentation with your department. I mean, that's a whole plan. Yeah. And that plan also entails the cooperation of the banks and the institutions, because as part of this scenario is those people who are answering the phone know of a key word. And even if the gun is to my head, it's a certain word that's used or a phrase and so forth. So there's a lot of in-depth things to this. Does it happen every day? I don't know, but it's a good plan to have there in those real serious situations. But we take what he says, very seriously, and it means planning and training.
I'd have one question, and that is, if the suspect comes out and talks to you, how do you know the difference? If he comes out and tells you, "Yeah, everything's fine. Yeah, I'm the clerk in here. No, that was accidentally set off." Are you prepared to go back in with him at that time, or do you just say, "Okay, we talked to the clerk, he came outside, he said everything's all right, we'll get in our car and drive off"?
Sounds like we've got the makings for about a 4 to 8 hour block of training here. And as a result of this, we're going to miss the fellow going through the station house wall trying out for the Bears and the California cops snoozing. But they'll be back. That's the latest presentation of Culture and Class from CrimeTime. We thank you for joining us here at the Metropolitan Opera for our latest installment, bound to find its way into the historical archives and educational treatises. Thanks to Officer Sinela Konjevich for braving these treacherous waters and coming out more or less unscathed. To Rich Sim for always providing us insight and expertise. We hope you'll find thought-provoking and enlightening. We'll continue squeezing Rich until there is no more blood left in his turnip. To Captain Kevin Murphy, who has always made the thin blue line a little beefier and as a result has helped make you and me a little safer. Mike Guzzi, who never fails to regale us with his wittiness, savoir-faire, and clever badinage. You'll find all 3 items in the deli section of your local supermarket. And to Deputy Chief Gregory Hawkins, a man who has helped anchor us in humor, studiousness, professionalism, and decency. And if it's the last thing we do, we're going to get him for it. Remember, only you, as first responders, can save the lives of beasts and children. Learn the signs of child abuse and animal abuse. Can there be any greater reward than making a difference? As one of the greatest broadcasters of this or any generation, Jack Buck used to say, thanks for your time, this time, till next time, so long. You're listening to and you're watching CrimeTime, an audio and video service from In the Line of Duty.